We're in our fourth week of a multi-week series in the book of Proverbs. It's entitled Life as It's Meant to Be Lived. We're in part two of looking at forging strong families, and part two is actually on effective parenting practices. Effective parenting practices. Last week we looked at marriage, and today we're going to look at effective parenting practices. And as we get ready to do that, let's prepare our hearts and minds with a moment of prayer. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for bringing us into your presence today. Thank you for all the volunteers. Lord, in so many ways, so many people give to serve you, to honor you, to bring you glory, and I give you thanks for each one. Now, Lord, as we spend this time in your presence, we ask that you would take us and sit us at your feet, and that as you speak, that you'd give us ears to hear and minds to conceive and hearts to receive your words for us. Your words not so that we can just become hearers, but so that we actually can become doers of what you called us to do. Lord, we pray all these things in your great name, and all God's people said, amen. In an article in Moody Monthly, Greg Macy tells of a time where he was in a restaurant and he overheard an angry father rip into a 7-year-old son. He said, "What are you good for, boy? What are you good for?" And the boy, who just simply spilled his milk, dropped his head down and he said, "Nothing. I'm good for nothing." Years later, Macy found himself disgusted with his own son. He committed some minor little fracture, and he heard himself ask the very same question. He said, "What are you good for, boy? What are you good for?" To which his own son said, "Nothing. I'm good for nothing." When Macy heard that, regret, of course, pierced his heart, and as he reflected on it, he said, "I realized that, you know what, there's really nothing wrong with the question. It's the answer that's all wrong." And so a few days later, with this, his son committed another minor offense, and he immediately said, "What are you good for, boy? What are you good for?" Only this time, before his son had an opportunity to respond, he picked up his boy, and he kissed him, and he hugged him, and he said, "Son, I'll tell you what you're good for. You're good for loving. You're good for loving." And from that point on, it became a little game. Every time Macy would ask, "What are you good for?" his son would chime back, "I'm good for loving. I'm good for loving." Today, we're looking at effective parenting practices. And the writer of Proverbs speaks some very colorful language about this. First of all, he would agree wholeheartedly with the psalmist in Psalm 127, verse 3, where it says that little children are a gift from God, right? Now, they're expensive little gifts, aren't they? But they are a gift from God. Proverbs 23:25 says, "May your father and your mother be glad. May she who gave you birth rejoice." Friends, make no mistake about it. Children are treasures from God, and they ought to be treated that way. They ought to be prized, and they ought to be cherished. They ought to be told tens of thousands of times that they're loved and that you're crazy about them, and that if you're a parent, you ought to love that child as naturally as you breathe. I once heard a child development expert say that in the studies that he had conducted, he found that most people who grew up to be healthy, well-adjusted adults are people who had had at least one parent who loved them, and hear this, this is his word, who loved them irrationally. Irrationally. And then he went on to say, on the other hand, when you find somebody who's grown up and they're not very well adjusted, or they seem to struggle with depression or crime or destructive habits or hyperachievement, he says you can almost always trace it back to the fact that neither parent loved them irrationally. Do you know what his conclusion was? He concluded that for every human being just to grow up to be what you and I would consider normal, they had to be loved abnormally, irrationally. And when they are, that's just what their heart needs. It's just what their heart needs. That's why Proverbs 19:22 says, what a person desires is unfailing love. What do you and I desire? Unfailing unfailing love, which is exactly the kind of love we see in the biblical story of the prodigal son. Most of us remember the story. The younger son takes off with everything his father will give him, which is all of his inheritance. And then he squanders it on wine, women, and song, and yet his father never gives up on him. He never rejects him. He never says, I told you so, or you blew it, or what are you good for anyway? No, he never says or does those things. Instead, daily, this father goes to the end of his driveway and he keeps scanning the horizon looking for his son's return. And one day, when he finally sees his son on the horizon, he runs. He runs to his son. But friends, hear this. Men in that day and in that culture did not run. They did not run except into battle to kill their enemies. And so what do you think that this son who has done nothing but dishonor his father's name, what do you think he's thinking as he sees his father running towards him? He's thinking, my dad is going to kill me. That's what he's thinking. It's not I'm going to mess with you, I'm going to kill you. But instead, when his father gets there, he throws his arms around him, he gives him a great big hug and a great big kiss, and he celebrates him. He celebrates him. Don't miss this. In spite of the headaches, in spite of the heartaches, in spite of all the pain, he loves his son with an irrational, unfailing love. Can you imagine how that son must have felt? He had dishonored his father. In that culture, it meant death. That's what it meant. He thinks he is going to die. At the very least, he thinks he is going to be rejected by his own dad. But instead, his father wraps his arms around him and showers him with gifts, and he celebrates him. He celebrates him in his return. Can you imagine how that son must have felt? Humbled, overwhelmed, loved with an unfailing, irrational love. The writer of Proverbs says, when you've got a gift that comes from God in the form of a child, pour out massive amounts, irrational amounts of unfailing love on them. But then, and here's where the balance comes in, rather than just drifting off into some kind of gushy, mushy, gutless sentimentality, the writer of Proverbs says that these little bundles of joy, these little innocent-looking cherubs, these little gifts from God are actually going to be parenting nail-biters. True character building for you and for me. Now, the key verse here is in Proverbs 22:15. And it says, Folly is bound up in the heart of the child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. Now, for years, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but for years there's been this ongoing philosophical debate. And it's this: are children born good and then they learn how to be bad? Are they actually born with a natural streak of rebellion that needs to be corrected? Which is it? Proverbs 22:15 says it's a no-brainer. The answer is absolutely clear. It says folly or foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. In other words, friends, our children are born deprived. They are born into this world as natural-born sinners. That's right, your little cherubs and mine. When they're born into this world, they have a little devil in them. And they have a little streak of rebellion and folly. You know, I don't know about you, but I never had to teach my kids how to be selfish. Did you? I never had to teach them to cry out, mine, 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 mine. I never had to teach them how to be mean. I never had to teach them how to hit their sisters. I never had to teach my girls any of that stuff. It came naturally from their mother. Yeah, I'm going to pay for that one. You know it. Do you remember the birth of your firstborn? I absolutely do. I remember Jessica, our oldest, when she was born. It was just like it was yesterday for me. I was there with Deb in the hospital watching her go through the labor hour after hour after hour, and I want to tell you, when she was done, I was utterly exhausted. Yeah. And when I finally held Jessica, and I looked into her great big beautiful eyes for the first time, I want to tell you something. I truly believe, I would have bet my life, absolutely bet my life, that my little angel was an exception to Proverbs 22:15. Truly, I would have. I mean, to believe that there was folly bound up in that little heart, That there was a sinister streak in that little angel? She's perfect. After all, she's my little girl, right? But then I realized, she's my little girl. And apples don't fall very far from the tree, do they? We know that. Now, fast forward a few years. Jessica's now about 3 years of age. It's bedtime. And for weeks, I mean weeks, there has been a battle raging. We've been putting her to bed, and she's been climbing out. We've been putting her to bed, and she's been climbing out over and over and over and over again. My little angel, my sweet little bundle of joy has turned into a radical, hard-nosed, I'm going to do what I want to do little rebel. I mean, truly, this is the truth. We tried everything. We tried talking to her over and over and over again. We tried taking her toys away from her. We tried taking her out and exhausting her before bedtime. And you know how that works. They have more energy than you do. And we tried absolutely everything we could think of over and over and over and over again, and nothing was working. Until finally, out of sheer desperation, I picked up the phone and I called in an expert. I said, hey, Mom, we've tried everything. I mean, and I went through this long litany of all the things that we tried and how exhausted we were. Mom, we tried everything, but Jessica won't stay in bed. She said, well, Derik, I know you're not going to like this, but does she have a lock on the door? Now, I don't know if you've ever heard a very kind and loving grandmother suggest you ought to lock her granddaughter in the bedroom. But you know what? It worked. Now, hear this. We absolutely hated every minute of that. But it became painfully obvious to us, even at that tender little age of 3, that at least with Jessica, we were going to need to find that delicate balance between doing lots of loving and using the rod of discipline, setting some solid and appropriate limits in her life. And during that time, and many others that followed, scriptures like Proverbs 23:13 gave us a lot of help. It says, do not withhold discipline from a child. Because it says if you punish him or her with a rod, or if you give him a timeout, or whatever kind of discipline works with your kid, it says they will not die. In other words, parents, get a grip. That little boy or that little girl isn't going to die if you discipline them. As a matter of fact, here, please hear this, discipline is necessary. It is absolutely necessary if you want your child to become all that they can be. Friends, I do not know an athlete. I do not know a musician. I do not know a student. I do not know a scholar. I do not know a computer geek. I do not know a Christ follower. I do not know a single human being who has ever become all that they can be without discipline. I do not know of that. Our word discipline comes from the Latin word for instruct. Instruct. And Webster says it means training that corrects and molds and perfects the mental faculties and the moral character of someone. Let me say that again. Discipline means the training that corrects, molds, and perfects the mental faculties and the moral character of someone. And so, friends, when you and I discipline our kids, we are actually called to instruct them, to train them, to teach our kids to perfect their mental faculties and their moral character. Which is why Proverbs 13:24 says, he or she that fails to discipline their kids hates them. They hate them. Why? Because, friends, when you and I fail to give our kids something that they truly need and something that we have the ability to give them, that's a sign of hate. Do you love your kids? Then discipline them, teach them, instruct them, mentor them, give them what they truly need so that they can become all that God designed them to be. Now, we don't have time to go into all the technical discussion about the different types and forms of discipline, like spanking versus timeout versus chair time versus bedtime, or if they're really bad versus hard time. But obviously, this is a truth that all of us should understand. I hope that we all do. No form of discipline should ever do violence to a child, ever. Or be administered when we as parents are enraged or out of control. I hope those are absolutely obvious. The goal of discipline is not to punish. Hear this. Punishment is not discipline. Punishment is strictly punitive. Discipline is providing correction and instruction so that our children can become all that God designed them to be. Now, let me boil this all down. The writer of Proverbs says, parents, if you love your kids, then you're going to need to find appropriate ways to influence their behavior and their attitudes. Not just their behavior, but the attitude behind it. Because if you don't, catch this, if you let your kids grow up without limits and boundaries and consequences and responsibilities, if that sin streak in them, in the heart of that child goes unchecked, it will eventually become a terrible, dark, driving force of selfish ambition that will not only alienate them from others, but it will eventually bring personal, social, vocational, and even spiritual ruin. Ruin. And so the writer of Proverbs says as plain as he can, if you neglect the discipline of your child, you are setting that child up for a lifelong pattern of headache, heartache, and ruin. Parents, children are a gift from God that need to be loved irrationally, and they need to be disciplined carefully. You say, well, Derik, what if I actually hit one of those walls in parenting where I don't know what to do? And I don't know how to keep that balance between love and limits. Well, friends, if you're a parent and you haven't experienced that yet, you will, right? And those of you who are parents, you know that. And so let me share an answer my dad gave me when I asked that very question of him when I was a young father. I said, Dad, how did you and Mom do it? I said, you know that you and Mom aren't perfect. I mean, Mom's pretty close, but Dad, you got a long, long way to go. That's exactly what I told him. But I said, Dad, you guys did a really great job of keeping that delicate balance between love and limits. How did you know when to say? How did you know when to say, our kids are going to be kids and cut us some slack? And how did you know when to say, you know what? That behavior, that attitude crosses the line. How did you know? What was the key? I remember we were sitting on his bed in his bedroom, and he looked at me and he said, Derik, to tell you the truth, I can only think to tell you this, that whenever we faced a situation we didn't know how to handle, first we prayed, second we leaned into God's word, and third we just made the best decision we could make at the time. We just made the best decision we could make at the time. Friends, with Dad, I looked at my dad and I thought, I'm going to be raising your granddaughter, and that's all you got for me? Seriously, that's exactly what I thought. But I want you to know, through the years, I've learned that what my dad said is it. It's it. Parents, when you and I don't know what to do, it's time to drop to our knees, to lean into God's word, and then make the best decision we can make at the time. The writer of Proverbs in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. In other words, in all your ways be prayerful. Lean into his word. And as you do, he will make your path straight. He will show you what to do. Now, beyond providing appropriate amounts of love and limits, another challenging part of parenting is actually helping each child discover their gifts and their passions so that later in life they can choose a course in life that actually fits them. Proverbs 22 says, train a child up in the way that he or she should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it. Now, there are actually two different types of levels or layers to understanding this particular proverb. The first is the general truth that's often been taught, that if you and I establish patterns for our children in their early years, gradually as they grow older, those patterns will often take root and become their own. Therefore, if you and I train our child to know what's right and wrong, good and bad, if we train them to be truth tellers and take responsibility, to be respectful and to be kind, then over time, they tend to internalize those values, and as that happens, those values become their own. Along with that, it's generally true that if you and I help our children understand that there is a good God in heaven that loves them, and that there is a Savior named Jesus Christ who laid down his life for them, paying the price for their sin so that he could forgive them and walk with them and guide them and love them and direct them, then usually, children that are given that kind of spiritual heritage will take it with them, and eventually they'll make it their own, and then they'll pass it on to their children. That's one layer of understanding of this text. But there's another layer. There's another level. Over in the book of Psalms, the Hebrew word that we translate in the way that he should go. That Hebrew word that we translate that way in the book of Proverbs is translated in the book of Psalms as the word bend. Bend. And it directly refers to the bending of an archer's bow. Now, today with standardized manufacturing, most of us who are good with a bow can actually pick up any bow and start hitting the target with a regular consistency. But back in biblical days, nothing was standardized. And so if any archer in those days wanted to hit their target with any kind of consistency, then they would have to spend significant time getting to know the unique strengths and the unique qualities of that particular bow. Friends, in the same way, as parents, if we train up our children in the way that they should go, then we're going to need to be able to spend a significant time getting to know the unique strengths and qualities of each child in our family, not superimposing our will upon them, but actually discovering who they truly are. Which means that we need to find out where they're at developmentally, physically, mentally, spiritually. We need to get to know what kind of interests they have, what hobbies they have, inclinations and habits they have. Why? So that we can help them identify and develop their own gifts and their own abilities. So that over time, they'll be able to claim those things for themselves. They'll discover their bent, the way that they should go. Now, friends, as that happens, those kids are actually going to feel good. They're going to feel good about using their gifts. But they're also going to gain self-confidence and self-esteem and self-awareness. And all that's going to help give them a compass to navigate their life into the future. And so parents, study your kids. Observe them. And of course, that means you're going to have to spend significant time with them. And in a culture where time is of the essence, that means you and I are going to have to make our kids a top priority. A top priority. And so parents, I'm going to ask you, what are your priorities? What are your priorities? Have you honestly searched your heart, or better yet, have you honestly actually searched your calendar? What are your priorities? Where do your kids rank? How much time do you actually spend with them? Are you willing to alter your personal priorities and schedule to get to know them and to give them what they truly need? A number of years ago back in Ohio, I was getting ready to do a sermon series on the family, and so the staff and I decided to go around and ask as many people in the church as we could about who had done just an awesome job of raising their kids. We wanted to make sure they had adults by now so that they weren't going to be bit by that later. You know how that goes. But we asked, what family is everybody else drawn to? What family does everybody else dream about when they think of family? What is that family in our church? And the names Ned and Wilma Winter came up over and over again. At that time, Ned and Wilma were both in their mid-60s. They had raised 4 truly awesome, incredible guys, 4 of them. And so I phone called them and I sat down with them. And I said, well, how did you do it? I mean, you raised 4 incredible guys. They all get along. They all love God. Others love to be around them. They love to be around others, and they love to be around you. And so how did you do that? If you were to actually pick just one decision that you made along the way, one practical thing that you did that was pivotal to raising up these guys, what would it be? Well, Dad Wilma immediately jumped in. And she said, I think it was the day that Ned made the decision to place the boys above his career. I said, what do you mean? Wilma went on to explain that when they got married, Ned was an engineer. He was a rising star in their corporation. He had already had several promotions along the way and had some really big plans for his future. But then the boys started coming along. And about that time, the company said, now, Ned, we really want to keep you moving up. We love the work you do. But in order to do that, we've got to have you start doing some traveling, which means that you aren't going to be home very much for a while. But in a few years, you should be able to move out of that position and get into one that's more settled. And Wilma said, he said, no, I'm not going to do that to my boys. Wilma said as a result of that, for the next 30 years, he was in the same job. He never moved up. He gave up his career for his boys. And then tears entered into her eyes, and she said, I couldn't be more thankful. I couldn't be more thankful. I turned to Ned, and I said, Ned, Would you do it again? Without hesitation, he said, absolutely. There is not one day, not one, that I've ever regretted it. But he said, you know, Derek, that was an important decision. But if I hadn't made the second one, the first one wouldn't have mattered. I said, what do you mean? He said, I made the decision to place my boys above any of my own personal interests. Which means when my boys were old enough to start playing ball, I gave up playing ball. I loved it. I was doing it 3 to 4 nights a week, but I gave it up, and I started playing ball with them. When my boys needed my help to do homework, I stepped out of other leadership roles so that I could lead my boys. He said, Derek, I want to tell you something. Ever since I did that, I've been doing a little independent study in my mind. And this is what he said. He said, I've watched parents raise their kids, and bar none, if those parents continue to place their own personal interest above their kids, then those kids eventually rebelled. Because it doesn't take very long for kids to figure out that that parent has something more important in their life than they are. And when those kids figure that out, that they've been replaced, they rebel. And he said, and since that day, that was 17 years ago, I've been conducting that little study my own. I've been watching parents, I've been watching people, and I can't tell you, I can't say what he said, that bar none, but I can't say this. In almost every single family where I have observed parents continuing to place their own personal interests, like playing ball 3 or 4 nights a week or going to the clubs or whatever, when they continue to place their own personal interests above their kids, those kids typically rebel. Parents, where are your priorities? Where are your priorities? If you're making your kids a top priority, if you're spending time with them, if you're helping put wings on their gifts and their abilities, then there will be a day that they will rise up and they will call you blessed. But if you're not, if you're continuing to put your own personal interest above them, then there'll probably be a day that they'll rise up and they'll call you something else. Now let me leave you with this final thought. Pray with your kids and for your kids. Pray with your kids and for your kids. Before my kids were born, each time I found out Deb was pregnant, like most people, I began to pray for my kids. And some of you know this already, but do you know what my primary prayer focus was? It wasn't for health. My primary prayer focus for my kids was that they would grow up to have an intimate, personal, passionate, growing relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Now, hear me, why? I didn't do that. I did not do that because I thought that was spiritually the right thing to do. And I didn't do it because I was some spiritual giant. I did it because I was selfish. I was selfish and I wanted the best for my kids. You see, I have an older brother that was born deaf, and I have an older sister, Terry, who was born with a double hair lip and a cleft palate. That means she was born with a hole in her face, no nose, no upper lip, no roof to her mouth. And hear me, as I grew up, I saw how those two, through their relationship with Jesus Christ, I saw how they overcame difficulty after difficulty, and they overcame hardship after hardship. And when I saw that, I soon realized there are worse handicaps for a kid to have than physical handicaps. And those worst handicaps are spiritual handicaps. Friends, catch this. We are all, tell me if I'm wrong, we are all going to have difficulties and hardships in this life. We are all going to have that, aren't we? There's no question about that. The question is, who is going to help you walk through those difficulties and hardships? And my brother and my sister had Jesus Christ, and he walked with them in those times, and I saw firsthand what a difference that made in their lives. And so my primary prayer for my kids, because I'm a selfish father, before they was born was not for health, but that they would have an intimate personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Why? Because I knew that would enable them to overcome anything and everything that this broken, messed up world was going to throw at them. Today I want you to know I continue to pray for my kids, but I also fast for my kids. I fast for them. Over 36 years ago, I felt like God was saying, Derek, are your kids really important to you? How badly do you want them to know me? How badly do you want them to love me? How badly do you want them to walk with me and to know my peace and my power? How badly do you want that? And I felt like he was saying, if you're serious about them getting to know me, then you need to get serious about fasting and prayer. And so that's what I do. One day a week for over 36 years, I fast breakfast and lunch, and I fast and pray for my kids. I fast and pray for my sons of my heart, my son-in-laws, my grandkids, all my grandkids to come from this day to Christ's return. I fast and I pray for them. During that time, I pray for them in all kinds of ways, but there are three primary biblical ways that I found very helpful that I pray for them. And so I'm going to give them to you. You might want to write down the scriptures if you want to for later. Number 1, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 15. It's pray for your kids to become wise for salvation. In other words, pray that early in life they'll give their lives to Jesus Christ and they'll learn to love Him with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 15. Pray that they will be wise for salvation. Second, Proverbs 13:1. Pray your kids will be teachable, open to correction. Pray that they'll be teachable and open to corrections. Proverbs 13:1. And then finally, Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Pray in all of their life that they trust in the Lord with all their heart and they lean not into their own understanding. Pray that they will trust in the Lord with all of their heart and not lean in their own understanding. Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Parents, pray for your kids. Pray for them, but also pray with your kids. With your kids. A while back on a Friday night, Deb and I were watching TV with Matt, one of the sons of my heart, and Heather, his wife, our daughter, and Ashley, one of my other daughters. And Matt got a phone call. He took it into another room, and when he was done, he came back in and he began to share that his dad, who had had lots of health issues at that time, heart disease, diabetes, stage 4 kidney failure. He'd just gotten out of the hospital, a long extended stay, and he walked back in the room, and Matt said, Dad's back in the hospital. And when he said that, of course, it was obvious that he was hurting, that he was troubled. So let me ask you, what do you think we did as a family? I mean, did we just go back and watch TV? Business as usual? No, I said, hit that TV off. And we as a family dropped to our knees and we began to pray for Matt and we began to pray for his dad. Friends, pray with your kids. Pray while you're driving down the road. Pray while you're taking your kids to school. Pray when you see an ambulance. I don't know how many times we've actually stopped. Well, I don't stop the car, but we stop where we're thinking about other things. And we start praying for those people in that ambulance, that God would touch them, that He would heal them, that He would let them know that He's the one who healed them. Pray at mealtimes. Pray at bedtimes. Pray when you get that phone call, maybe especially when you get that phone call. Stop and pray with them. Pray with your kids and pray for your kids. And if you do, I promise you this. Someday, odds are, they're going to pray with you. And they're going to pray for you. Why? Because when you train your child up in the way that they should go, when they're old, they'll not depart from it. Let's pray together. God, I pray that you would give us eyes to see. First of all, eyes to truly see you for who the Father and Daddy that you truly are to us. That we would push through those times where our human daddies do not enable us to see you well. Or our human mommies do not enable us to see you well. Instead, Lord, help us to see you for who you are so that we can become more like you as parents. That we'll love irrationally. And that we'll also seek to discipline our kids so that they can become all that you designed them to be. God, help us to be parents. That our kids and our grandkids and all the grandkids to come, if they don't get to meet us, that they would hear about us. They would hear about the impact that we had on our family line because of how we followed you. How we sacrificed for our families and for you. How we surrendered ourselves to you, and as we surrendered ourselves to you, we became this beautiful thing in our family, this beautiful one who would love. and balance it off with discipline. And that each person in the family line now has been blessed because of it. God, we pray these things in your great name. And all God's people said, amen.